right. Good morning, everyone. I am Darian the Eclectic, and today we're talking bookish things. So, I'm in my PJs still, hair unbrushed. It's very early in the morning, and I have my delicious cup of tea. Grab your drink of choice, cozy on up, and let's talk books. All right, so today I want to give you a book review on Where He Can't Find You by Darcy Coats. And this was a book that was assigned to me for part of our MFA program. And if you haven't seen that video of me talking about what the MFA program is and all the good and bad about it, I'll link that video below so you can check it out if you're interested. But today I want to tell you how much I loved this book. And first and foremost, I'm going to read the back blurb to you because it was so good. It sucked me right in from the beginning. So this is Where He Can't Find You by Darcy Coats. It was published in 2023, and the audiobook, which is how I read it, listened to it, was read by Reba Buhr, and she did such a fantastic job. Now, part of the credit, of course, goes to Darcy Coats and how amazing she was at differentiating all the different characters in such a subtle way, but Reba Buhr really brought it to life in her audiobook version. And it was just a beautiful rendition of this book. Highly recommend if you're into audiobooks that you listen to that version. So here's the back blurb for Where He Can't Find You by Darcy Coats. Don't walk alone or the Stitcher will find you. Abby Ward lives in a town haunted by disappearances. People vanish, and when they're found, their bodies have been dismembered and sewn back together in unnatural ways. But is it the work of a human killer or something far darker? Don't stay out late or their Stitcher will take you. She and her younger sister live by a strict set of rules designed to keep them safe, which is why it's such a shock when hope is taken. Desperate to get her back, Abby tells the police everything she knows, but they claim their hands are tied. Don't close your eyes or the Stitcher will remake you. With every hour precious, Abby and her friends are caught in a desperate game of cat and mouse. They have to get hope back quickly before too much of her is cut away and before everything they care about is swallowed up by the darkness waiting in the tunnels beneath the home they thought they knew. Right away, I was just so sucked into this book. I'm not usually one to read a lot of horror, but this is actually horror/mystery, and it's in the YA category. So it really goes right up to the line before too nightmarish and gory. It's not gory at all, in my opinion, but it does walk up to that nightmare line in just the right way. Just enough to keep you hooked and turning those pages like crazy to see what happens next and how bad exactly it's going to get for these kids. Now I say kids, but really it's the YA level of reading. And so they're mostly high school kids dealing with, high school problems, but it's really verging over onto more of an adult theme when it comes to the trauma these kids are dealing with and the way their lives have been so messed up by how awful this town is and this Stitcher is to everyone in the town. Now, I mentioned all the kids. There's a group of 4. There's Abby, who's the main character, and her sister Hope. And then there's also Reese and Rhea. And then there's Jen, who's a newcomer that comes in and kind of gives them a different perspective. And there are a bunch of adults who are, of course, because it's YA, are believably unhelpful. And the Stitcher, which we don't know as we go through the entire book, whether this is a person or a supernatural monster of some kind. Now, I will say that the mystery and the horror that unfolds throughout does have a subtle hint of the supernatural throughout, but not enough as you read to, and this is my opinion, it wasn't enough as I read through for me to know for sure if this was paranormal or if there was going to be something that came up later to kind of explain what all of these seemingly paranormal things, why they were all happening. So it kept you reading in terms of not being sure exactly what was going on all the way through the book in the best way. It was so good. And I mentioned that the adults were believably unhelpful. It was as if Darcy Coats had written a book before, and she's written over a dozen books, but she anticipated these questions coming up for the reader in like, why aren't the adults being helpful? Why can't they do something? Why aren't they taking action? And as you read through the answers are given to you in believable ways at believable times. And so it does make it very clear and very believable that these kids have to take action on their own. They have to do something. But because the adults couldn't do anything, and for the reasons given, that also keeps you reading, because it's like, how can these kids, these high schoolers, do anything when the adults tried to take action and they couldn't do anything either? So that is really well written on Darcy's part. Now, as we go through the mystery and the horror of it, there are a lot of red herrings that are thrown in there. There are a lot of twists and turns that go along that make you think like, oh, this is the moment. This is when they're going to figure things out, or this is when, the answer is going to come about, and then something else happens and it makes you completely question, or at least it did me, completely question your assumptions as you went through the book. And it made me change my predictions as I went through on who the killer was, what the killer was, what was really going on behind the scenes. And it was just really, really well done. All right, so I'm going to read the beginning of this to you, just a couple of paragraphs, because it hooked me in so well. And there is a bit of a feeling I have here on how the book started and something that was missing for me. So this is chapter 1. Do you want to see something bad? Abby woke with icy sweat plastering her clothes to her skin. Her breathing came in rough gasps as she stared into the darkness flooding her room. The nightmares were always the first warning. They came before any of the other signs, before the birds that plunged out of the sky, before the streetlights all died, before the sickness, before the disappearances. She reached for her nightstand and turned the clock to face her. 4:15. She watched the second hand tick forward, making sure it was still keeping time. Technology always broke when things were getting bad. She'd been having nightmares for nearly 2 weeks. This one was the worst, though. A memory from that night at Jessica's house. It was supposed to be a girls' sleepover, but Abby had been the only one who arrived. She and Jessica had sat at an empty dinner table for half an hour, no parents in sight, before Jessica had asked the damning question, "Do you want to see something bad?" Now, right away, this pulled me into the book and would not let me go. This is just one of the mysteries that were brought up as you go through the book and what exactly Jessica was talking about when she said, "Do you want to see something bad?" And the beef I have, and it's not really a beef, I have mixed feelings about how this started because, and this might be a little bit of a spoiler, so if you don't want to hear this, maybe scoot ahead a few minutes. But this particular memory, this particular dream that Abby had didn't actually come back up until toward the end of the book. And I can see maybe why she didn't seed it throughout, though I had completely forgotten about it by the time it was brought back up, which maybe was the point. If Darcy had wanted us to remember this particular dream memory throughout, I think it should have been seeded a couple more times throughout the book. However, when it did come back up, it helped answer a lot of the questions that came up throughout the book. It helped put the mystery together. So with that being the case, I can appreciate why it was done that way, though I had forgotten about it by the end. If you've read this book, I would love to hear your opinion. Do you think it was meant to be forgotten because of it being the thing that helped tie up all the loose ends? Or do you agree with me in that maybe it should have been seeded a couple of times throughout? Let me know what you think about this particular book, this particular thing in it as it went through. Now, as we get to the end, it was bittersweet, and I'm not going to spoil the ending for you because I do want you to read it. But if you have read it, drop your thoughts below and tell me how you think the ending went for you. I thought it was very satisfying. I think it tied up all the loose ends, answered all the questions. It defined inherently what kind of book this was and where we were going as far as, was this paranormal? Is there a scientific explanation? Was this a person? Was this a monster? What's actually going on with the adults in this town and everybody who, you want them to leave. It's one of those questions like, why don't they just leave? And it helps bring everything together nicely, perfectly. So I really did love this book. I devoured it in 2 days, audiobook version, and I absolutely would recommend it. It was an incredibly hooking book that clamped me down all the way through. So that's what I think about Where He Can't Find You by Darcy Coats. This was a fantastic read. I cannot wait to dissect it in our MFA residency that's coming up in June, where we're going to go through as a group and talk about the good, bad, and the ugly about this book, what everybody thought. And after we do that, maybe I'll come back and report back to you about what everyone else thought, all the authors in the program that I'm taking for writing popular fiction. If you want me to report back and let you know how that went, drop a comment below and let me know. And next, I'm going to be talking to you about Gideon the Ninth. So if you've read that book, stay tuned. My next book review is going to be about that, and I am really excited to talk about it. All right, until the next video, bye.